All right, let's go live. We are live. Okay, welcome to another meeting, our last meeting for the session before our joint meeting where we'll work on interim topics. Barb, will you please call the roll?
Representative Chadwick. Representative Haroldson. Representative Harshman. Excused. Vice Chairman Knapp. Representative Newsom. Representative Ottman. Representative Wiley. Representative Yin.
Here.
Chairman Olson.
Here.
Thank you.
All right. First bill we have for our consideration is Senate File 127, the Wyoming Stable Token Act. Representative Yin, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I bring to you in committee Senate File 127, the Wyoming Stable Token Act. This is a bill that comes out of the Select Committee on Blockchain. It is a bill that we actually, in fact, passed last year. What had happened was the governor vetoed it over some concerns over management of the stable token and the act. And so in the interim, the committee worked on some of those issues and brought back the bill before you this year with the hope that the governor won't do the same thing. To give you an overarching concept and why we would do this as a state government, when you are exchanging value in the internet space, one way you can do it is through a centralized system, right? So you could use bank-to-bank transfers. You could use Venmo, for example, which is a money transmitter, so you can transmit money through that. Or if you are involved in the cryptocurrency space, you can transmit value with cryptocurrency. And so for the most part, most cryptocurrencies are not pegged to any specific value. They have their own market fluctuations of how much value a Bitcoin is worth. And so for some purposes, there are folks who want to either to get themselves into the crypto space at all, or just to exchange value for value that's pegged at a certain amount that they know and are confident on, use stable tokens. So there's a couple of stable tokens that exist now. For example, the ones that are pretty well known are pegged to the US dollar. So one USDC is pegged to $1, and it's run by a private company who issues these USDC tokens and says that they have the value of $1. And so you can pay them actual dollars and they'll give you these tokens. The issue there is that not everyone knows whether the private company actually has the value behind that currency. So if there was a run on redeeming those tokens back for actual US dollars, you can't be super confident without an actual third-party audit that those private entities actually have the value that they say they do to be able to reimburse every USDC token. So if they had issued $100 million worth of USDC, they might not have $100 million in assets to actually back that up, because they might have invested in riskier assets with the idea that they could get a bigger return for their operating costs, but ended up actually losing money, so they don't actually have the backing assets anymore. So that's the issue of the state of the industry right now when private industry does it. And so what we could do as a state of Wyoming is provide a service so those consumers have confidence that the backing of a stable token is actually there. And the only thing that we would invest in is US Treasury bonds, which have literally never in the history of US Treasury bonds have lost value, and provide that transparency in government that those dollars are still there, while at the same time making the state revenue, which helps to keep everyone else's taxes low. So the revenue that we would gain is that when folks exchange US dollars and we give them a Wyoming stable token, that we would be able to invest those US dollars in US Treasury bonds and then make money off of the interest on those US Treasury bonds. And so folks, and then also be transparent that this is the only thing that we're investing those US dollars in. And then when folks who want to redeem their Wyoming stable token for an actual US dollar again, that can still happen. We would liquidate some of the treasury funds to make sure that we have the assets to also give back those dollars. But in essence, there's in the bill, there's some structure over how oversight of that is done, as well as how reports are made to committees, just to make sure that that transparency is there, that we would always make sure that we have assets that back up the Wyoming stable token, and that we would, as well as outline how the money tips into funds from the interest from the treasury bonds. I'm happy to go through the bill, but I'm also happy to just answer questions with that overarching concept on what the bill does.
Representative Newsom?
So the question is, how would we get out of this? So if we enacted this and we sold $100,000 worth and then nothing, do we keep track of who owns them? Is it on the person that buys them to keep track of us? I'm not understanding the bookkeeping side. And, you know, is it like a savings bond and I'm responsible for keeping track of that? So I'm just wondering the reporting and the administration on our side of a program like this.
Representative Yin?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So the bookkeeping is actually, we wouldn't keep track of each individual owner. We would keep track of the tokens that we have issued. And so each of these tokens that exist in the blockchain have a specific signature, so we know when someone tries to send a token back to us that it's a valid Wyoming stable token, and then that we have the issuance to issue it back. So the bookkeeping would only be how many tokens have we issued and how much assets do we still have to redeem the tokens that are outstanding. If we wanted to back out of it, I think at some point we would have to issue a new law that says we're shutting down the Wyoming stable token and we're going to give a statute of limitations of 5 years or 10 years to be able to redeem, or maybe less, to be able to redeem existing stable tokens so we can wind down the system and leave it at that. But I do think it is possible to back out of this, and I don't think it would be that difficult.
Representative Chadwick?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Yin, so could you describe for us how this would be beneficial in a foreign trade situation?
Representative Yin?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So in a foreign trade situation, I mean, I think that the beneficial aspect is that it's to the consumers is that it's pegged to the value of a US dollar. And so you have an understanding in foreign party transactions that the dollar value, the amount of value in those stable tokens is that consistent value of what the US dollar is. So that would be the main benefit, is that you can trust that the amount that's being sent isn't going to fluctuate within minutes or days. It's going to stay the value of the US dollar.
Follow up, Representative Chadwick?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So given that we're going to call him investor / owner of the tokens, will not make a profit on the ownership of that, can you describe for us what the benefit is to that individual?
Representative Yin?
Mr. Chairman, yes. So again, they're not investing in the value of those stable tokens going up. It's merely a method of being able to transact without having to go through a single party and being able to use that in the cryptocurrency space, right? So if you are trying to transact to buy Bitcoin, for example, right? So you actually want to invest in Bitcoin, but you want a method of turning your dollars into something into that space without going through a single party to actual purchase those Bitcoin with US dollars. You can first convert them into Wyoming stable tokens and then have any party that accepts Wyoming stable tokens because they know it's the value of $1 can accept that in exchange for a for Bitcoin of that value. So again, the value of having the token itself is the ease of transaction within that cryptocurrency space. And that's why all of these other private companies exist to have those stable stable tokens in the private space, but they don't have the confidence of the public to be able to know that that value has the true backing of actual US dollars behind it. If that makes sense, but I'm happy to clarify more if it doesn't, Representative Chadwick.
Representative Chadwick?
Just a follow-up. My questions are rooted from a very long conversation with Mr. Rothfuss or Senator Rothfuss. So I'm just trying to bring out some points that I think make this an attractive bill. Thank you.
Representative Ottman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative, you had stipulated that before the governor vetoed it, and so it was reworked over the interim. I see here that on the commission, the governor or designee, auditor designee, treasurer or treasurer designee, how's that going to look in their departments? Are they going to have to expand? Is it going to be just meetings occasionally? Is it going to be often? Is it going to, I guess I don't understand what it's going to look like in that. And also, what if they really aren't on board with it? I guess if it's law, it's law. But if you could just explain that relationship a little bit.
Representative Yin?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That is an excellent question. I don't think that it would be meetings that would happen very often. I think it might be a little bit more work as the stable token is required to get set up, right? To approve rules and make sure everything is set up and is going smoothly. But I don't think it would be any additional staff time once everything is set up. And I think the meetings would be relatively rare. If those electeds were not interested in working in it, I think that's definitely a different question. But I'd be happy to have folks who have had those conversations with those folks to see if they would know.
Representative Harshman?
Just remind me again when this was vetoed before. What year was it? Was it last year or was it a couple of years ago?
Mr. Chairman, I believe it was last year.
I'm seeing some nods. And, I always probably can't answer this, but maybe there's some folks when they testify on the bill, I always think, where would we be if it wasn't vetoed? I mean, how much money would be in this? How would this token look a year later? Any thoughts? Or maybe there's others here. I see other people nodding that might want to address that, but go ahead.
Representative
Thank
Yin?
you.
Mr. Chairman, I don't have the market cap of what current stable tokens use right now, but it's fairly large. So the amount of transactions that we could have facilitated and the interest that we could have made in just the 1 year on treasury bonds is probably pretty large. But again, I don't have those numbers in front of me, and maybe some others who can testify can do so.
Other questions for Representative Yin? All right, thank you, Representative Yin. State agencies. Or governor's office. Welcome.
Morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Betsy Anderson, and I'm the Deputy Chief of Staff and General Counsel for the Governor's Office. As has been mentioned, the governor did veto this legislation last year. I have testified throughout the interim as the Select Blockchain Committee worked on this bill, and so I thought I'd just come to express it's kind of the same concerns we had through the year and also discuss a little bit about some of the things that were changed from last year. First, with the things that were changed, and I think they were changed in line with some comments from the governor, and we really appreciate that. Originally, this was to be housed in the treasurer's office, and now there is a separate entity. It will be, as was mentioned, the auditor, the treasurer, the governor, their designee, and up to 4 private sector members with expertise in the area. And I do think that's helpful. And also, this bill, compared to last year, actually provides for an executive director. We really felt like there needed to be a single person who was a full-time job to handle this. This is a big enough project, a big enough program that to try to have add this to the duties of somebody in an agency I don't think would bode well. And we would like to say it still has the AG review. And that was important to us as well, and that did stay in there. And I will say there are some concerns with the constitutionality of the bill. But before I address the same problems that were in the bill last year, this year, I will say that those changes maybe have created a couple of other concerns. As Representative Ottman mentioned, it is the governor's office or their designee, and it is for all the electeds. And looking at this and figuring out what needed to be done, I mean, this group of people they are going to have to find an executive director that has the skill and experience to do this. And then that person's going to have a staff, probably a small staff, because most of this will probably be contracted out, but still have a staff. They will then have to enter into multiple contracts for the creation of this, for the audit, you're going to have an independent audit. You're going to have marketing. You're going to have platforms. And these members of this group are going to have to, once an executive director and staff are there, a lot of work will be done, but they're still going to have to review and approve all this. And so when the fiscal note came, we could not think of a designee within state government who would have the bandwidth to do that. Certainly in the governor's office, we are very lean and there would be nobody. And so in the fiscal note, we did put in that we would need a part-time position. We thought somebody on an average would probably work 20 to 30 hours a week. That time would probably taper off as the program was up and running and a lot of this was set up, but initially there will be a lot of work. And so that was one concern. And then also another concern raised is that, if you've watched the market, we really think that the executive director and these staff members need to have background checks. And that is a statute. You have to have that in statute. In fact, we have a separate bill for the governor's office to have background checks. And so that would need to be included I just think that's a critical aspect of this program. So those are kind of with the changes, a couple of issues we had. The ongoing problems that we see with this that really have not been addressed with this new bill, one would be, we still haven't seen a business plan. I don't, 500,000 has been put up to start for a startup. I don't know where that number came from. I don't know where the break-even point is, where this will now pay for itself with the fact that 102% of the funds have to stay in a trust and then you can spend after that. I don't know what the cost of all these expenses, all these contracts and staff, there's just nothing that has been presented that gives us that information, which creates some concern. And then another significant problem is the fact that there is a deadline for the end of this year to issue the first stable token. And the concern there is rush decisions are not thoughtful decisions. And I think there are pressure on people when they think it's all or nothing. If I am not able to issue a token by the end of this year, then I will not get to issue a token. And that we feel like can make for poor decisions. And what's on the line here is the state's reputation as a leader in this area with speedy banks and digital currency and all these types of this world. And we're trying to be a leader in this world. And The concern is, just one mistake could really really hurt our reputation. And so those issues are still there and are still concerns for the governor. So, and again, those, except for kind of the new problems that we saw, new issues with some of the changes, those are what I've spoken to all year long, and those would be the concerns we have. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Representative Newsom?
So in your intro, you mentioned constitutionality. Where does that play?
It's, Mr. Chairman, Representative Newsom, it would be a US Constitution, and is this considered money, a unit of money? So a state is issuing currency, which is a US authority and not a state authority, or is it a security? And I don't know. There would have to be significant research on that. And of course, that is as I said, the AG review is a part of this, and the AG has to review and say that, yes, this is legal. So we were happy with that. But I did want to point out that there's a lot of discussion about that as to the constitutional concerns that might be presented with this bill.
Representative Wiley?
You said that there's some concerns that we don't want to not be at the forefront of this technology and stuff. Do you think that us not being able to implement this and be able to stay at the front of the pack, couldn't this also hurt us if we don't start advancing here?
Ms. Anderson?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, I think that would be a concern. And so you really, it's a risk analysis, right? What is of greater concern? And I think our office considers putting this forward and failing as a much bigger risk than not putting it forward at all. I can understand where somebody has a different analysis of that, but that's where we're at.
Committee, additional questions? Representative Yin?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess with the December 31st, 2023 deadline, I think having the pressure to make sure it happens is important, but I do understand the risk of making sure that we do it correctly. Is there a timeline that the governor thinks would be sufficient for enacting a stable token?
Ms. Anderson?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Yen, I get asked that a lot. Certainly a further out deadline would be better. What we would prefer would be just a list of criteria. You've checked these boxes and you have all this in place. And once you've satisfied that criteria, then you can issue the stable token, because then you know that all necessary criteria have been met instead of a date. Obviously, a date further out than 2023. As I mentioned, just hiring somebody as the executive director could take 2 or 3 months. By the time this passed, we look and you find somebody, you get them, they have to give notice to their job, they have to come here. You've got multiple contracts. Are you issuing RFPs for those? And that's a lot of work, taking bids, doing interviews. Then they have to actually do the contract work to be ready by the end of the year. I'm not going to say it's not possible, but when I look at it and just knowing my work in state government, it seems like a really heavy lift.
Representative Yin, where is the December date? I'm having a hard time.
Mr. Chairman, it's on page 13.
Oh, there it
lines
is.
19 and 20.
Yep, got it. Thanks. Representative Harshman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just, on your idea of the checklist kind of to get started. So what are those things you'd see in that checklist, just big box kind of ideas? Obviously you'd have a lot of leeway with rules and those kind of things, but go ahead. Just
Ms. Anderson?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Harshman, yes, and rules is something I haven't mentioned that would have to go into place. And certainly you could do emergency rules. You would have to, because if you do regular rules with public comment period, you wouldn't have rules in place in time. The big checklist item, and I'm not the expert in setting up stable tokens. So I think, but I do think you would have to have all the proper contracts in place. And to me, the most important one would be the independent auditor contract. You would want to make sure, I think you would want to make sure any and all regulations have been complied with. I would, obviously the AG review is a checklist item. I'm again not an expert in setting these up, and I can think about, I am looking at the big picture. I think somebody, you could certainly, we have contacts with investment companies that work on administering these types of programs, and we could certainly work with them on putting together what would be a pretty good checklist. We've had general conversations with them, but nothing that specific.
Committee, additional questions for Ms. Anderson? All right, thank you. Other state agencies, Commissioner, are you wanting to testify? No? Okay. All right, public testimony. Come on up. You might as well, are you gonna, is Tayson testifying in general or just him? Who else is gonna testify on this bill? Anyone? Yeah, come on up, just fill up the seats and so we can keep it rolling. Yep.
All right, thank you, everybody. So I'm John Bugnacki. I'm the Deputy General Counsel and Government Affairs Director for TASIN. And then, do you want to?
My name is Jay Yang. I'm CEO of TASIN.
So TASIN is a blockchain software developer. We have about 30 or so employees and contractors all around the world, and our international worldwide headquarters is here in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and we've been here since early 2021. I myself have been quite involved in some of these processes in terms of presenting testimony and analysis to the Wyoming Blockchain and Financial Technology Committee previously. So I think there's a few relevant issues to really go over in terms of thinking about this bill. The one issue which Representative Harshman brought up previously is the fact that the amount of the relevant percentage that could be derived from the small fees on like redemption for something like this are pretty tremendous for many states. And many states similar to Wyoming have sort of looked at this and behind closed doors, like have started looking into this. So, I mean, ultimately, if Wyoming doesn't really move on this because of the large business potential that can be derived, then ultimately, I think it's fairly likely that within another year or two, another state will launch this. And as has been commented previously, the market for stable tokens and stable coins is very large. I mean, in the at the very least, in the tens of billions, if not hundreds of billions of dollars, including USDC, USDT, various of these other stable tokens. And people were asking before about, well, what's the use of this? In addition to being able to facilitate like an on-ramp to blockchain technology, one of the main advantages of blockchain is that it leads to better auditing and security. That if a criminal is using a particular like cryptocurrency, for instance, you can associate that with their particular wallet ID, be able to track them down, watch the flow of funds, very closely. And that's why, in the case of various scams or frauds that have occurred, the Department of Justice and other U.S. government agencies have been able to track this down very easily. In addition, you're cutting out relevant middlemen for like credit card companies and ACH and these various clearinghouses, and for not even just interacting with cryptocurrencies themselves, but say, for instance, that you want to send a certain amount of money to a business partner or a friend that you have in Europe, rather than sending it through international wire or through a credit card company or ACH, you can directly send it to them with lower fees than the credit card companies or the international wire companies would impose. And as a result of this, the relevant advantages of stable tokens, the market is obviously quite large. And I can see that there would be great space for the Wyoming stablecoin. And one thing that we've discussed in various of the committee hearings, and we've heard from the governor's office, it's like, well, what is the actual market for this? I mean, one of the largest stable tokens in the entire world, USDT Tether, which is issued out of China, I believe. There are many doubts in terms of whether the amount has that the reserves that they have are actually collateralized. So as a result, USDC has been able to increase its industry profile, but there's even some existing doubts about Circle and USDC. So in terms of the relevant addressable market of providing the association with an actual government, with a state, I mean, it could be of real tremendous popularity in the market, because as we've seen with these various frauds, like the downfall of FTX and Voyager Digital and the Celsius network, that there's really a huge desire within the marketplace for increased trust and the type of association that the Wyoming stable token would have is definitely going to be very big within the marketplace. And talking about, well, what the relevant marketing plan would be, I think just on the basis of that alone, just being able to release it and being featured in major newspapers that Wyoming is doing this, a lot of the marketing really would sort of handle itself. In addition, the Wyoming stable token, what it could facilitate is that you could facilitate, for instance, Wyoming residents paying their taxes in the Wyoming stable token, conducting internal transactions within Wyoming vis-a-vis that. And so the state itself, by issuing this stable token and then facilitating integration among various governmental agencies, even just saving on the amount that would be imposed by various middlemen in that process, even outside of the overall commercial utility of it, would definitely be worthwhile. And so from the sort of business plan angle of it, then in terms of the relevant steps that would need to be compiled, because we are a blockchain software developer based here in Wyoming, we've had multiple conversations with the Wyoming State Treasurer, Kurt Meyer, and his office, Chief Investment Officer, and we have essentially laid out, and we are happy to provide it to the relevant authority that's going to be established under this bill, of pretty much all the technical steps that you would need to be able to create this stable token, the complete design of the system, and then how that would integrate with a relevant business case. And so we think that if all of that was accepted by the relevant committee, either for whatever contractor or person who's fulfilling that contract would move forward on, it can definitely be accomplished by that date. And then one of the last things that I will specifically address is the relevant constitutionality concerns that the governor's office has brought up. I myself, since we've been sort of working with the treasurer's office and talking to various people on within the Wyoming legislature, I mean, I've had private conversations with fairly large and major law firms in the United States who would be willing to defend of course, this is all subject to being finalized, but they would be willing to defend the constitutionality of this if the constitutionality of this was questioned by a relevant federal agency at very low or very minimal cost. So in terms of being able to handle the constitutionality angle, I think the constitutionality of this relevant bill is actually quite strong, and we could go into that, but it's already been much elaborated upon. But even if that was to be brought up, that relevant potential burden on the state, and of course, we're happy to talk to the governor's office or the implementing authority once the bill is passed on my contacts at these major law firms and sort of their interest in helping to defend the constitutionality of this bill. And so we're happy to do that, in addition to providing the full all of the relevant steps as to how the system would work, the relevant business plan, at least in our eyes. And so having said all that, the main thing that we have to think about is that, as I said at the beginning of the presentation, there's going to be a state that's going to do this. And if it's not Wyoming, it's going to be someone else. And of course, there's always the concern that, well, what if this is issued and is a dud, or if it's done inefficiently? But certainly there are many people, both within Wyoming and the rest of the United States, that we've talked to who I know would help to make this a success. And I think that the expertise in the treasurer's office and the governor's office within the Wyoming legislature, they're more than capable to, and then to create this overall authority, more than capable to be able to do that task, to get it out there. And this could be a major winner, you know, a major money generator for the state moving forward. Did you have anything to say, Jay? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman, if I may, and thank you, representatives. So to answer Representative Harshman's earlier question about what is the scale of this thing, what would be potential revenue for the state? So USDC, which is a private organization, has in their depository about $60 billion. And given that, assume that you put $60 billion into T-bills, then it's a significant amount of revenue that can be generated. And that's just one organization that's running a stable coin. And their main selling point, again, in the United States is that they're a US regulated organization. And we think that having a state that is going to provide a lot more transparency to the stablecoin industry is going to, or stable token industry is going to be phenomenal. In fact, a lot of the venture capitalists who would like to invest directly instead of going through banks and so on and so forth, using stable tokens have always told me, hey, you know what would be great if we have an audited US denominated stable token, because then they can directly invest their money that they earn in stable token directly into various industries and various companies. And this will only help capital formation, in my view. And in fact, a part of the reason why Tassin as a company is based out of Wyoming is its, you know, it's foresight in setting these you know, regulations and, you know, passing these laws. And that's the reason why we, you know, I've just located, hey, Wyoming is a state for me. And we think that stable token presents a tremendous opportunity in terms of revenue generation and for the prestige of the state. I understand the reputational risk that it presents, but we can do this in a responsible manner and do it in a manner that minimizes the risk to the state, that involves a lot more, you know, hand off a lot of risks to the private organizations that run it, and finally be able to give the power to the state in determining what the state can do with the stable token, as opposed to working with these private organizations that are issuing stable tokens on their own. We think that this presents an enormous opportunity for the state.
Questions for Tassin? Representative Knapp?
Mr. Chairman, so do you see the quote-unquote money generation coming from fees? Because obviously, if we're limited to what the investment will be in treasury bills, then that's where I'm assuming the
Yes.
revenue comes from, is the fees?
Yeah, so part of it would be from the deposits that are converted into T-bills or notes. And right now, the rates are relatively high, and we even if it's a goes down to 2% or whatever it is, we think that if the stable token has a possibility of growing into $100 billion deposit, you know, deposit base, then it's going to be $2 billion for the state. And so that's just on the revenue basis. You can also have a additional revenue through redemption fees, which could be up to 0.5% or 0.25%, so that when someone wants to you know, take the money out from a long-term deposit, then state can also then charge 0.25% or whatever it is. So if that's a $10 million, that's a lot of money too. So and there are other ways in
This
which
bill doesn't have redemption fees in it.
We think that the implementation detail should include those things, of course, and we think that laying out all of those revenue sources that are relevant to the state's long-term viability is absolutely something that must be addressed.
Okay,
Follow-up.
please.
So, and I'm going to speak in layman's terms, and I would appreciate the answer back because I'm not an expert in this, but basically we're talking about a secondary exchange currency. You know, there has been risk, as we've seen in the news lately, but this one supposedly gives that stability by the backing of the US dollar. And do you have a concern with the way that inflation is going, the way that spending is going at a national level, that value of the US dollar may not be stable? Just that question.
Of course, it's difficult to speculate where inflation is going. However, I would agree that the general tendency toward inflation of the dollar seems to be hurting the average consumer, and it actually, hurts the U.S. industry as a whole, because then the hiring cost goes up, at least for the higher salary range. But we think that by creating institutional knowledge about how to issue tokens and then benefit from that inflation rather than be on the sideline is only going to benefit the state of Wyoming by being able to tap into that source of inflation and at least combat that in a way that is forward-looking and with new industry and capital formation in mind.
And in contrast to some other digital assets like Bitcoin, for instance, which many people would regard as sort of being digital gold or a hedge against inflation, the purpose of stable coins, in contrast to serving as a necessary hedge, is to engage in US dollar transactions, but be able to do so with lower fees, greater efficiency. So it's just using US dollars, but being able to do so in a much more convenient and efficient way. So that's the main way it should be looked at least in my opinion.
Vice Chairman Knapp?
Thank you. One more question. So in the worst case scenario, as I read the bill, and maybe you can elaborate on this, is the value is $1 for a coin. If this were to all collapse, let's say the dollar just went downhill and this system were to collapse, the consumer that bought into these coins, according to the bill, may not get that same value back, dollar in redemption.
My understanding is that they would, because it is pegged to the dollar, and so for every dollar deposited is converted into T-bills or T-notes or whatever it is, and therefore it is essentially dollar pegged, and therefore the depositor would get the same dollar back, because in the operation of the stable token, or how it would happen is the depositor would request redemption, and then the redemption organization would then sell the offset amount in T-bill and then make the cash available.
The only major,
We're getting a little-
stable.
Excuse me.
Oh,
We're getting
apologies.
I let it go for a while. It's getting a little sloppy. You need to go through the chairman, so you need to be called on before you speak. And when you are called on, you will say, Mr. Chairman, and then you will address the representative's question. That's just the typical format of how we do this.
Apologies, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you both. Yeah, I let it go, so I'm just as guilty. All right, you had a follow-up response?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Knapp, the only major stable coins that have collapsed in this way are the ones that were not fiat backed in the way that the Wyoming stable token would be. They operated with, for instance, like it's called algorithmic stable tokens. They would operate by increasing the ones, essentially putting most of the volatility in another two token sort of system. So one is stable and then the other absorbs the liquidity. And that was in the case of Terra Luna. And that won't be the case with the Wyoming stable token. Thank you.
Representative Knapp?
Mr. Chairman, just one follow-up. So if worst case scenario, if those treasury bills were at a loss and in the negative, and the bill says, in no case shall the redemption result in the state paying a higher amount than the total assets in the Wyoming stable coin token trust account divided by the number of tokens that are out there. In essence, a person could be getting paid less than what the value of the original token was. Is that true?
Mr. Chairman and Vice Chairman Knapp, I believe that's the case. Again, I'm a layperson in terms of the proposed bill, but the loss would, since the disposition would then yield a dollar amount, so that would, the only reason why there would be a loss is if the federal government collapsed.
Additional questions for Tayson? All right, thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Question maybe for both of you, and I'm just trying to, if we pass this bill as is, there's probably a pretty good chance. I mean, I've heard the concerns from the chief executive, you heard them as well, and I keep going back to this idea about the date versus kind of the business plan, kind of checklist idea. And we heard, from the deputy chief of staff, some ideas. Are there any, contracts, audit, AG clearance, what's in the bill? Background checks is in the bill, I think, or thought I saw it. But are there any other ideas you'd suggest to us if we're going to bring an amendment like that to remove the date and put in this kind of checklist that, okay, we've checked all the boxes, green light, now go?
Go ahead.
Yes, Chairman and Representative Harshman, I think the responsible thing to do is write up a requirements, the system requirements, and what it should be performing, so that any competitive bidding process would then adhere to the system requirements. Certainly, there are many technological system requirements that it must perform, as well as operational, and of course, it should include the any kind of audit requirements that's there. But that could be something that is added, in my humble view, could be added as an addenda to the bill rather than as a primary aspect in the bill. Well, of course, I'm I'm not as well versed in this whole process. So, but however, we think that those would be the right thing to add, and then perhaps that the system requirements could then spin up a new discussion about, okay, is this going too much into the weeds, or is this just the right set of requirements? Thank you.
All right, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you, Chairman Olson and the entire committee. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Sean?
Chairman Olson, members of the committee, my name's Sean Murphy. We refer to this bill as the little engine that could. It's been with us for a year. I've been speaking at it at every committee hearing and during the interim. And the one context that I'd like to share with the committee is this understanding, and we heard about this yesterday with Senate Bill 101, is this idea of a source or a reserve of value, a store of value. And we think of that physically as physical gold, for example, a store of value. What we're talking about here is the digital world, where if we think of store of value in the digital world, that right now is Bitcoin. But that's very different than this bill, where we're talking about a stable token, and that's all about the value of transaction, right? How we're moving money or assets, the ability to transact and the privacy, and the two fundamental concepts, right? Store of value and transaction. So this is all about transaction. And I want to just keep my comments pretty brief after that, really specific to Ms. Anderson and what she said. She's been great. She's been at many of these committee hearings as well, and has always provided very thoughtful concerns from the governor's office. But we've continued to address those concerns. And I want to just go down the list and address her concerns today. The first one was the constitutionality, and I think we addressed that. We think we have a very strong footing on the constitutionality of this, and we have more support coming with the Lummis-Gillibrand bill. That's the federal proposed legislation, and that really irons out and provides even more protection for this, and it's coming from Wyoming. And we have some really great members of that team from Wyoming that know the constitutionality side of this. So that's number one. We feel really good about that. Number two, has there been a business plan? Now, where is the business plan? We provided some kind of executive version of business plans last year. Happy to provide more robust ones as soon as are needed. Like, that's not a difficult thing to do. We know the plan, and I think having this the functionality set that we heard here just a moment ago would be a key part of that. So business plan, check. Constitutionality, check. The next one is the deadline rushed and hurried? I think candidly, in government, maybe that seems rushed or hurried, but this is more of an entrepreneurial project. And so to whoever would be running this, that person would probably have an entrepreneurial background. This is a very long timeline. to somebody who looks at it as an entrepreneur. And, you know, like over almost a year, like 8, 9 months, that's plenty of time to issue one stable token. So I don't think that that's rush or hurried. I think that's in fact more than reasonable. The state's reputation, we heard, was another one of the concerns or objections. And I think this is the idea of fearing the risk as opposed to looking at the opportunity, right? This is a great opportunity. It furthers our leadership in the state, and it puts our brand, continues to get the Wyoming brand out in front. So instead of having fear and being afraid, I think we should be looking at this as another opportunity we can execute on. So I don't think that the state's reputation should be looked at in that light, but more as, hey, what are we doing to advance our position? And then the last one we did not hear about today, but has been a part of the conversation until today, has been this idea of we don't want to compete with the Wyoming stable token with these other private stable tokens that are out there. And I've really advocated and wanted everyone to understand that it's not so much that the Wyoming stable token would compete with the other existing stable tokens like USDC, for example, and the market cap is 143 billion right now, the whole stable token market cap. It's not that we'd be competing against those private companies that make up the market cap. It's that we were going to be competing against the central bank digital currency. That's what's coming. This is, some people are speculating that it'll happen, and I'm here to tell you it is inevitable. There is going to be a central bank digital currency, and that's going to operate in two ways. There's the transaction. Remember, we heard that, the value of the transaction between central banks. They're going to use a CBDC to transact between central banks. And then there's also going to be private and business transactions between the central banks. So you'll receive your CBDC in your digital wallet. And here's the difference with that and a Wyoming stable token. That will be fully tracked. Like, you can track digital currency. You know exactly where it's going, what it's being used, what it's being used to purchase things. That's the privacy issue. So when we start talking about a CBDC, it's a privacy issue. And what we're really looking to do with the central bank digital currency here, like effectively the Wyoming stable token is our version of that at a state level, the state's rights of that, is to say, we're not going to have all those track and trace parts of our stable token. We're going to let people have free transaction, and we're going to make it easy for them, because we know digital transactions happen a lot faster than through SWIFT or having to do wires. And we have these business opportunities that we heard about. So I think we've really addressed all of the governor's concerns and positions. And if they continue to keep coming up, I'm happy to provide a business plan and put all of that together. And I don't think the contracts that, Mr. Chairman, that Representative Harshman shared, I don't think the contracts are much of a concern. So we'd have a developer. That'd be somebody that builds this. That would be either like Tassant or a company like IOHK that has been a very generous donor to the University of Wyoming. They've built Cardano. They're building a stable token now. Like, they have the expertise. We know who they are. We know their representatives, and we can contract with them. We would need a good auditor, probably a company here, an auditor here in Cheyenne. That doesn't seem too difficult. And then the third piece, and this I need to look at the bill to see if this is in there, but we would need a bank contractor, probably a Speedy would be the idea to do this. Someone like Custodia, where they would be the ones holding the Wyoming stable token. They would be the legal fiduciary of the stable token. So those pieces are all there. I don't think there are these high mountains that we're afraid of climbing. They're actually kind of hills that we have already gone up and over and looked at how we would do. I think there's some really good options on people who would fit the role of the executive director for this, as well as someone who would work in the governor's office. These folks are not hard to find. There might be one sitting in front of you in a yellow shirt. So I mean, we're out there, and we're ready to do the work and represent the state and really lead, not from a place of fear, but from a place of opportunity. This is where the world is going. Like, we have to lock down our digital future. And we've done a great job doing that with physical resources in the state of Wyoming, but we're moving into more of a digital world. So I really appreciate you hearing my comments and looking at this as an opportunity and not from all of the concerns. Thank you.
Questions for Mr. Murphy? Mr. Representative Harshman.
Keep beating on this drum a little bit, but I'm trying to think about getting to the finish line, and I know one member of the committee, Mr. Chairman, is on there, but again, this idea of that hard date, versus the checklist by the commission, you know. If that, you know, gives the executive some peace of mind, I don't see it as a problem, I guess. Do you, I mean, somehow we gotta get to the finish line and get everybody's concerns addressed on the deal, but I understand what you're saying. You say we can do it, but I don't think it is a problem, is it, to maybe substitute that date with some kind of the checklist requirements?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Harshman, I don't think it's a problem to change the date with a checklist of items.
Okay,
I think that's fine.
thank you.
Both are doable.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy.
Mr. Murphy, what if, this was floated to me, I believe, by Senator Rothfuss, what if the bill just said that the commission shall endeavor, instead of shall be prepared to issue, but shall endeavor to issue at least one token by December 31st? So it's like, there's a goal, there's a target date, but it's not required. And that way, I mean, because I'm not necessarily opposed to the checklist idea, but I think if we try to build a checklist right now, it's just, we're not gonna have a complete list. We're gonna miss something. What do you think about that, Mr. Murphy?
And we've got 3 readings too.
Yep, Mr. Chairman, I'm fond of the word endeavor.
Okay,
Yeah. I think that would be
Alright.
fine.
very good. Any other questions for Mr. Murphy?
Mr.
Representative Harshman?
Chairman, and sorry, and I just worked through you. We've potentially got 3 more readings now, so pass this committee to work on that checklist with the executive branch and maybe get the right language. That's what we do. We try to make each other's bills better as it goes through the 2 houses. So I'm not figured out right now maybe, but maybe we can go to work on that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Questions? Thank you, Mr. Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Additional public testimony. Senator Scott.
Mr. Chairman, I come from you as one who heard this bill for the first time in the Senate Corporations Committee, and frankly was intrigued. And I thought I ought to come down here and talk to you because I have a fair history of opposing bills and ideas that come out of the blockchain task force. And I looked at this one very carefully, and frankly, what I see is a commercial opportunity for the state of Wyoming that would be very useful to us. And I looked at what are the things that can go wrong with this thing. And you look at what's happened in the marketplace with the stable token issuers. And the risk is you get a run on the token because people think you don't have the assets to redeem them. And with this bill being restricted to the treasury bills, so short-term US government securities, and with the plan to publish regularly the list and the number of tokens outstanding so people can see that their money is protected. I think that risk has been addressed. I looked at a number of others and felt that, yes, they've been addressed as well. And so I thought it was useful to come down here and say, look, as one who has been a skeptic in the past, was not involved in writing this bill, I took a look at it, and frankly, I want to urge you to adopt it. And I think that the bill, as it stands before you now, is complete and at the right level of specificity. I heard some suggestions earlier. I thought, gee, that's an implementation piece that's best not put into the statute because you may have to adjust things. So that's briefly, Mr. Chairman, that's my testimony and my reason for coming here.
Questions for Senator Scott? All right, thank you,
Thank you.
Senator. Additional public testimony, Senator Rothfuss.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity, and committee. It sounds like we've had a very thorough discussion, so I won't say much. I just would note, as you raised, Mr. Chairman, that changing that timeline so that instead of a hard line, it becomes endeavor, I think is a perfectly reasonable approach that assuages one of the primary concerns, and that came from a discussion with the governor yesterday, I believe, that we had that chat. That was one of the biggest concerns, was just, hey, this is too short of a timeline. I think the timeline's fine, candidly. But if what it takes to provide additional confidence is a shift to that timeline, I'm perfectly comfortable with that. I think we need to keep our eyes on the outcome more than the process. At the same time, getting to Representative Harshman's questions, Mr. Chairman, if there is a high-level checklist, and if that comes up again through the process, I think that too is probably reasonable. I would encourage keeping it high level so that we don't end up overly restricting the outcome or prejudicing the outcome by checklist. That was our concern really from the interim of not having a checklist, was we don't know enough of the details to put a good checklist together. And if it's a statutory checklist, then you might end up breaking it by checklist. So that would be my caution there, but appreciate all of the testimony. I think was very accurate. With regard to Representative Knapp's questions about the valuation, I would point out that the reserve account, the trust account, is actually set to a 102% fill rate. And that 2% is backed out based on if there is negativity in the yield rate for T-bills, which, to be clear, has never happened in the history of the country, but we still planned for it. If there's negativity in that, then what's your negative runway versus liquidation? The 2% was planned to allow for liquidation of the bills over the timeline length of life of the bills without depreciating the asset. So it basically would allow you to fully liquidate the account over the life of the bills, still holding everyone harmless and giving back that dollar. And that was something that the chief investment officer and I sort of talked through to ensure that that additional level of surety was there. So I hope that addresses your concern. I think that was the questions that I heard that I wanted to hit upon. So I'd be happy to answer any further questions, but it sounds like the discussion's been great and very thorough.
Representative Harshman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Rothfuss, and I forgot to ask the other presenters, because they were all nodding when I asked this first. But just, that the little engine that could, as Mr. Murphy said, I mean, I know a crystal ball, but a year ago, I mean, where would we be at, do you think, if this, and I know it's a hard question, but just in your.
It is a hard question, but a year ago when we were talking about this and thought it was a good idea, rates we were talking 1.5% to 2% as being our aspiration point. I did check with the chief investment officer, and we'd be getting about 4.8%. So at this point, you contemplate that the total global market cap on stable coins of any sort, which are far inferior to what this product would look like, are in the 130-ish billion range. Well, if we got to 100 million, which would be honestly low projection, we'd still be getting a $4.5 million a year yield, which would be more than enough to pay for the program and tip a little money into the schools and the general fund. But it is not unreasonable for us to be holding in the billions of dollars of assets, an aspiration point of a $10 billion Wyoming stable token. Now we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars, $400, $500 million, towards a split between the Common School Permanent Land Fund, Reserve Account, Common School Permanent Land Fund, and the General Fund. That would be handy.
Additional questions for Senator Rothfuss? All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you,
Thank you,
Committee.
Senator. Any other public comment? Any public comment online? Anyone raising their hand? No? All right, I will close public comment. Committee, what is your pleasure? Moved by Representative Harshman, seconded by Representative Yin. Let's see, there's nothing that can be done to page 1. Amendments to page 2. Amendments to page 3. Page 4. Page 5. Page 6. 7. 8. Page 9. page 10, page 11, page 12, page 13. All right, Representative Harshman.
Mr. Chairman, the suggested amendment that you brought forward would be on line 18, I believe. On page 13, and just scratch "be prepared," and in its place put "endeavor." So the commission shall endeavor to issue at least one stable code.
Okay. Let's
I
move.
think that works.
I think that works. Moved by Representative Harshman, seconded by Representative Wiley. Discussion on the amendment? Question on the amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that amendment has been adopted. Any other amendments on page 13? Page 14? Representative Harshman.
Mr. Chairman, I just really a question for the committee and, you know, the issue of background checks. And on section 3 there on line 13, I'm sure that can be handled in this area, I'd think. But I just wanted to bring it to your attention and the committee's attention if I think we need to, I didn't see it anywhere else in the bill, I guess, and I was brought up by the executive branch, and I just wanted to make sure necessary to implement this act, including background checks, or I don't know, I just want to run it by the group. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Committee, I do think that that could be an appropriate place to put background checks. It definitely could be handled within the rules generally, but if we want to guarantee it in legislation to try to alleviate some concerns. Senator Rothfuss.
If I may, alternatively by amendment, putting it into the terms and conditions of the commission, I believe that's where it's put elsewhere in statute, by simply adding a paragraph on page 4, laying out the requirement that this particular commission require background checks. And then there's language obviously elsewhere in statute for those commissions that require background checks. So it would just be a matter of copy, paste, insert. Probably not something you want to do right now, but
On line 18.
good idea.
Line 18 is
Yeah.
where you're,
That's what I'm thinking. Thank you.
yeah. So we could do a concept amendment and get that language.
You could do a conceptual amendment. Yep.
So, Mr. Chairman, if that's.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members on line 4, or excuse me, page 4, line 18, we'd insert a new paragraph, and we'll get that standard language from LSO on, you know, that the commission will require background checks. So,
Who is it requiring background checks of?
well, I think the members of
the commission?
Of the commission, obviously not the electeds, but the appointed members of the commission. And then as the commission sees fit, relieve all their contracts, those kind of things.
Mr. Chairman,
Representative Wiley.
I think on page 7, possibly line 16, just to get ahead of some of those concerns from the executive's office, we could put something in there also for the director employees must pass a background check. Just to kind of double down on it.
Okay, Barb, you got it? It's on page 4 after Romanet 4. Oh, that's it. That's the amendment.
I think we can write 4 broad enough. to
Yeah.
include employees.
Yeah. I think 4 should be written broad enough to cover background checks of members and anyone the commission enters into a contract with. Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Yep.
So maybe just a procedural question, given the timeline that we have for committee of the whole, and it needing to be re-referred to appropriations, how soon would those amendments come out in a standing committee report before we can re-refer it? If we make a conceptual amendment versus doing it a committee of the whole amendment?
Yeah. it might be easier to take the time to build the committee, of the whole amendment, so that there's not that back and forth, because this report's gonna get read in, and then I'm gonna refer it to appropriations, and it's probably not gonna hit committee of the whole until Monday. It won't.
Yeah, so Mr. Chairman, maybe I would suggest that we withdraw this amendment and just build it as a committee of the whole amendment.
Okay,
Mr. Chairman, I withdraw, and I agree. I think we've got a little tiny amendment that'll be,
easy.
on the endeavor. And then, no, it's a good point, but Representative Yan, and then we don't want to trip it up ourselves. So thank you. I withdraw. Thanks.
Were you the mover on the background check amendment? Yeah?
I
Okay.
was, yeah.
All right. Withdraw that.
Withdraw, and we'll go to work on it.
Withdrawn. Yep, just the one amendment. Any other amendments to this bill? Any discussion on this bill? Question on the bill. Barb, will you please do a roll call vote on Senate File 127?
Representative Chadwick?
Aye.
Representative Haroldson?
No.
Representative Harshman?
Aye.
Vice Chairman Knapp?
No.
Representative Newsom?
Aye.
Representative Ottman? Representative Wiley? Representative Yin? Chairman Olson?
Aye.
So 6 aye, 3 no. Do pass with amendments?
All right, do pass with
Amendment.
amendments. Representative Yin, you'll floor manage the bill. Okay. Thank you, Senator Rothfuss. Next bill for our consideration is Senate File 134. But I do not see the senator. Senator Bouchard was here. Maybe he's in the hallway. Yes. Welcome, Senator Bouchard. Bringing us Senate File 134, Right to Farm Real Estate Disclosures.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm glad to be here. Thank you, members of the committee. This is a simple bill. I guess I could talk a little bit about the bill before we go through the bill. What this is, I'm not trying to point at the lawyers, but this is a legal bill. And what we're trying to do here is just like in so many other states that they've had an encroachment onto the agriculture industry, where somebody moves in and starts having a fight with someone who may have cattle, or, I mean, it happens in all areas of farming. If you go in the San Joaquin Valley, you'll see there's spray rigs that spray oranges. And even though they spray a lot of organic products on those oranges, people don't like spray rigs. You'll see it everywhere. It's coming. I'm telling you, it's a wave that's coming as more land gets sold in Wyoming to people from out of state. There is the same push is going to happen here, where you have someone who moves in and decides they do not like the agriculture operation that's next to them. And what this bill does is very simply is a disclosure that when the home is sold, it's handed off. These are other states have done the same exact legislation, where that gets handed off. And then on the real estate side, inside their software, they have everything on file. Let me give you one example. In the Golden State, it used to be all the counties had different disclosures that were all trying to say the same thing. And their software couldn't, it was a mess for the realtors to try to get all of that into one system and having mistakes. Actually, the realtors in that state actually got together and helped draft the original disclosures I had. I mean, people didn't like it because although it's not much different than what's there now, realtors actually helped get that done in that state. If you look at the problem, you've got realtors that are in the middle of it too, because they're selling a piece of land and you may have someone who starts legal action. I mean, who wants this mess? It's really simple. Mr. Smith, did you know you were buying a piece of land next to a farmer or a rancher? And that's all this is. It's an exhibit in a court case or any kind of legal action. And it's the right thing to do to make sure the farmer or rancher is protected in the state. Just like in so many other states where they've enacted legislation very similar and almost exact to this. I'd ask the committee to resist. I will say that although I'm not presently hanging my shingle anywhere, I do have a license for real estate, and I'm going to tell you, there's a strong push within the real estate market to stay away from disclosures. They don't like them. And I could go into depth if you want to ask me questions about that, but that's why there's a resistance from the industry to resist these kind of bills. I'll go through the bill real quick. On page 2, this is on line 4, page 2, that's just the notice. It says that we shall provide a disclosure as required in this bill. And then as you go to starting from line 8 down, this is basically renumbering. So that's all this is here for, is just to renumber. So it's in the bill. It doesn't, none of these definitions are really matter to what's the heart of this bill here. And then when you go to page 3, this is the heart of the bill. Every seller of vacant land or subdivided land, so that means either vacant land or a subdivision or land that's been subdivided. So in any way, whether it's improved or unimproved, shall provide to a prospective buyer in writing a property disclosure statement that provides notice of farm and ranch operations that are occurring within 1 mile of the land to be sold. No transfer subject to this subsection shall be invalidated. So we're also saying, look, if you miss this in the transaction, it's not going to hold up the sale. So I think it gives a lot of room here. As we go further down into the bill here on line 12, this is the actual disclosure that will get printed. And as you read it, the part that became controversial is it was said that, oh, we're calling Wyoming stinky. That's just not fair at all. I mean, when these cases are serious cases, when someone goes after that rancher, these are serious cases. This disclosure is just so the rancher, the farmer, the person that's under attack has an exhibit number 1 to give to the courts. You know, Your Honor, I don't know why Mr. Smith is having such a problem. I'd like to enter exhibit 1, and Mr. Smith knew exactly where he's moving. He moved next to our farm. He was made aware that there could be odors, flies, dust, machinery operating 24 hours a day, including aircraft, and there's presence of animal waste in the application of fertilizer, herbicides, and pesticides. Simple. It's an exhibit. So when the rancher's under attack, and by the way this works in the real estate world is this would go out as a disclosure, and inside their system, they would have their own buyer acknowledgement. The realtor would say, to protect themselves, the real estate broker would have a form that says you received this acknowledgement. So that does not need to be in the bill. That's on their side. It doesn't need to be in the bill. So with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Senator Bouchard, where does the notice come from? Where does the language for the notice come from? Does it come from another state? Did you draft it?
Mr. Chairman, the notice as crafted is right here. And
That's not my question. My question is, where does it come from?
Where did I get it?
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
Actually, this is from several states, because in the Senate, people didn't like the way I drafted it. So what I did is I pulled stuff from different states.
Okay. Okay. Do you know which, do you remember which states?
There's some in here from the Golden State. There's some from eastern states. I think one was Maryland.
So is this is this, do majority of states have a notice of right to farm, or several states, or give me a picture of
Several
what that looks
states
like?
have a right to farm statute, and then several states have come back and done a disclosure law. So there's two different things going on there. What we did a little bit different, I think, is we are really tying on to the right to farm in our disclosure. So, and I think that's a good thing because it's statute already. In other words, the right to farm is statute. So we're just kind of citing, hey, we have a right to farm here in Wyoming. Does that answer your question, Mr. Chairman?
It's helpful, yeah, not exactly. I mean, it would be
Let's
nice.
let's drill down, Mr. Chairman. I'm glad to ask me another way.
Well, it would be, I guess I would like to know how many states have a notice of a right to farm, if you know.
I don't know that number because I just kind of looked around. I mean,
And the notice of right to farm on page 3, that's the language that has to be included in the notice at a minimum.
correct. This is crafted to where this is the actual, but it also says, if you'll notice, at a minimum, they can add more to it.
Okay.
So if they have for instance, if a realtor has a agricultural support company, let's say they work on tractors, they could probably add that to it, that this is an agricultural support company that, you're purchasing property next to an agricultural support company, they could add that in there.
Okay. Representative Wiley?
Senator Bouchard, isn't it already the responsibility of the buyer to do their due diligence before they purchase a piece of property?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Wiley, this is not about hand-holding the buyer. That's not what this bill does. This bill is in the result of a buyer who wants to, and becomes an owner, wants to take action against a farmer because they don't like his operation next door. So don't let anybody kid you. This is not a hand-holding device. This is so that way when they get this disclosure, and then the broker actually hands that buyer another form that says you received this disclosure, this all will go into a court case as an exhibit that they all knew that they were buying property next to a farm. This is based on, Mr. Chairman, this is based on legal cases, is what drives this.
Representative Wiley?
Senator Bouchard, one more question. Also, why did you limit this just to farming? Why didn't you do to other industrial activities or so on and said forth?
Senator Bouchard?
Mr. Chairman and Representative, that's not where we're seeing the issue. The issue that we've seen nationwide is the attack on the farm.
Representative Newsom, and then Representative Ottman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do you have examples of actions, legal actions that have been taken in the state of Wyoming from somebody that bought property against an adjoining or a agricultural operation within a mile?
Mr.
Senator
Chairman and
Bouchard.
Representative, there was some testimony in the Senate of people that I didn't even know that were going to testify of having problem neighbors that they had law enforcement called on them. So I hopefully they are testifying today. I don't know if they are.
Okay, Representative Ottman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Bouchard, okay, coming from an area where there was lots of subdivisions and whether that be an acre, 5 acres, 10 acres, minimum 20 acres, could this help to eliminate the problem where there's a pig farm up the road or a chicken farm up the road that you only can tell that on certain occasions and the way the wind's blowing, or irrigation where people don't know about how irrigation works and that it's a little bit different than the way other things work. Could this just enhance, like the good representative was saying, the buyer's responsibility to say, oh my, I need to know these things? Because the experience that was that there was lawsuits because people weren't aware, and people were trying to sue people for smells, and people were trying to sue people because they were turning head gates on and they didn't realize how all that worked. And a chicken farm that was 5 miles up the road, that would gag you. But nevertheless, it was agricultural land. So could this help to alleviate that? And secondly, the realtors say that they have a place on there to check already. So would verbiage help the buyer to be more comfortable with where they're moving and the experiences that they will have in their new home?
Senator
Thank
Bouchard.
Mr. Chairman and Representative, I think the one thing that, like I said, I don't think the bill is a hand-holding bill, but what I do think it does is if someone didn't disclose something, like there is a chicken farm that's downwind, and all of a sudden they've signed all the paperwork and it's done. Whereas when you have a disclosure like this, at least at the minimum, what is this disclosure, Mr. Realtor? I don't know what this is about. It does bring up a question that maybe they better look around a little bit before they, and I gotta tell you, I'll tell you a story, and it's really brief. But I had a house one time, and it's people that were closer to me than just they weren't just walk-in customers, and they had a house, totally different disclosure, but the basement had been flooded with sewer water, and they said it was going to cost $15,000 to fix it. I said, let's get somebody with a camera out there and look at it. And I pulled all kinds of strings to get that because it was busy. Nobody wanted to do it. Got the guy out there, $250, and the camera view showed that the pipe had just slipped, because you don't glue those pipes in the ground. They just slip them together, and the pipe had slipped apart, and it backed up, and it was in the basement. So the guy was really good with the camera, that he showed the customer where it was, marked it, showed him, hey, if you dig right down here 6 feet, that's where it is. And customer fixed it himself, saved himself tons of money. I mean, comparison of $500 and $15,000. And when it came time to sell it, I said, let's disclose it. Let's tell the potential buyer that we had a problem, and as we fixed it, and that way it doesn't come up that we tried to hide anything. And he talked to another realtor, and the realtor told him, let's not disclose it. And I lost that sale. But you know what? I can sleep at night. And I think that you're going to hear people that don't like these kind of disclosures. And that's all I'm trying to stress to you. All this does, it does to your question, Representative, Mr. Chairman and Representative Ottman, it does go towards that, to where everybody's kind of on the same page. We know that there's agricultural land, but I mean, deeply, I can't say this enough. This is all about, and you can appreciate this, Chairman, it's just an exhibit in a case. So that way everybody knows, yeah, they knew they were moving here. They can't say they weren't aware. And it's to stop, save the courts, save times where we're not in court. We're not calling the deputies out. We're not wasting everybody's time. And mostly we're not making it a problem where a farmer or rancher has to just be inconvenienced and financially impacted by such actions. So I hope that answers your question.
Representative Knapp.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Senator, and I'm sorry I didn't do the research in advance. I was trying to do it on the fly here, but this definition of farm and ranch operations, do you have that definition by any chance?
Mr. Chairman and Representative, it's in the Green Book. If you go to if you go to that statute right there. I mean, I didn't want to make that the focus. I mean, even though, so you have a right to farm in Wyoming. That's basically what this is. We just tied it to it that, you have a right to farm. The disclosure is the most important part of this bill.
Mr. Chairman, follow up?
Yes.
Is, so also in our current statutes, is there a disclosure agreement required with a buyer acknowledgement currently for any industry?
Senator Bouchard.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, no. This would probably be the first one. That's why there's opposition, Mr. Chairman and Representative, because they don't like it. They don't like disclosures. And that's why I told you the little story I told you. I think when everybody is on the same page, I think it's a good thing.
All right, let's move to public comment. We only have about 15 minutes left. I do want to get through this bill.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Dan Larson, Senator, District 19 up in Powell. I ran an irrigation, I farmed for quite a few years, 23 years. Ran an irrigation district after about 9 years, and I see it all the time. And I lived in an irrigation district that had to deal with this type of situation where a farmer came and bought a house or built a house in an irrigation district area. He obviously is at the bottom of the field. And of course, they're doing furrow irrigation, so it's flood. And he got his house flooded and took him to court. And there was 2 of them that did that on 2 different cases. And of course, the irrigation district has insurance to cover that, but it cost them a lot. And what happens is in the end, they don't get a ruling from a court to actually say that, yeah, you have no case here. They usually settle because the insurance company doesn't want to keep on going through it. So it could cost $10,000, $15,000. So I think this is vitally important that at the moment when somebody's, selling, that they notify the people that may be buying in some sort of disclosure, and hopefully they got a signature on it, that they realize that this could be an issue. It would be kind of nice if we had something maybe in the notice also referring to water and irrigation. I don't know how you would, at the very bottom on line 16, page 4, if, or irrigation issues, or I don't know how to, water issues. I don't know what to put in there. I should have thought of that more. But that's probably where you get a lot of cases where there's issues. I know of another guy that had a water line running down along somebody else's field, and the neighbor's trees roots were getting into his pipeline. They'll find their way. And so his way to deal with that was to kind of keep those trees from reaching in there, and he kind of shut it up with a little chemical in there, and it didn't do the trees any good, to tell you the truth. And so that could have been a situation. Well, and then they went to court. Obviously, you can't kill my trees. Well, your trees are on my property. So I think in that situation, they'd go to court, and hopefully a judge would say, did you know when you bought this that there's a possibility you might have problems with agriculture? And hopefully it would settle quick. That's probably pretty much all I got. If you got questions.
Questions for Senator Larson? All right, thank you, Senator.
Okay, I do one more thing. I think the realtors are going to come up here and say we can't do this, and obviously, I believe it may be tough for them to sell it, but it shouldn't be. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Larson. Additional public testimony. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Lori Urbikite with Wyoming Realtors. I'm glad others were willing to testify on my behalf today. We are, first off, not opposed to disclosure. In Real Estate 101, before we even get our license, we are told disclose, disclose, disclose. We are not opposed to disclosure. Wyoming is a non-disclosure state. We do not require disclosures for residential real estate, for commercial, for industrial. No disclosures are required on property conditions, except we do have one in Wyoming, and that is on vacant land that's outside of a subdivision. The issue there was water, and that was passed, I don't know, 5, 6, maybe longer, few years ago. And that was passed because there were large parcel subdivisions being sold that didn't have water or power and no way to get water or power to them or utilities. And so it was the feeling at that time that, and people were buying the property sight unseen. And so it was the feeling at that time of the legislature, and we did not oppose it, that that should be disclosed, that people buying those parcels should know really what they're getting into. But even that one didn't void a sale if it was not done, and the buyer could opt out of requiring one if they wanted. So we are not anti-disclosure, trust me. It is a great tool for risk reduction in a real estate brokerage firm. I've had my real estate brokerage license for over 30 years, and that is one of the things that we just beat into the heads of our agents. You have to disclose, and you, anytime that a seller wants to ask you about disclosure, you tell them it is your best interest to always disclose. We are required to disclose property conditions that are detrimental, that are obvious, or maybe latent defects. We have laws on that already in our license law. So we're not against the disclosure. However, to answer a couple of the questions, all 50 states have a right to farm law, all 50 states. In doing some research, I find Indiana, North Carolina, Iowa, Idaho, and Missouri that have had some basic lawsuits. And Florida had an issue, and they just updated theirs to tighten it up. But those laws were passed beginning in the 70s. Ours was passed in 79, I believe. And the purpose of them, whoops, the screen disappeared. In general, the right to farm laws deny nuisance lawsuits against farms. That's the point. This disclosure isn't going to change that. And it's, you know, we are more than willing to add a line in our contracts. I've already talked to the forum's chairman, and he said, yeah, we could do that. So that it reminds the realtor to indeed have that discussion. But please remember, when we're using the word realtor, we are a trade association, a member organization. We don't represent all the sellers in Wyoming. We don't represent all the licensees in Wyoming. So we are the trade association. We provide standardized forms for our members, and we are more than willing to add a note in there, so a notice basically to remind them to have that conversation with the buyers. We also, I spoke with our instructors that do the pre-licensing classes for realtors or for real estate licensees, and they again said, yes, we will hammer this home, that we are a right to farm state, and that you need to be making your buyers aware of that as well, especially if they're from out of state. But again, all 50 states have a right to farm law. So it's not like unless they're moving here from the moon, they probably live somewhere where there were farms. Now, you know, maybe they lived in downtown Manhattan and don't realize that there really are farms. But we are not opposed to disclosure. We will do the disclosure with or without this bill. I just think this bill is a little bit over the top and, quite frankly, not necessary. It's not going to stop a lawsuit. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Ms. Urbikite? Representative Ottman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hi. We had spoke yesterday, and one of the reasons I was making the comments I did today is because you were going to provide me with that. You already had that disclosure line checkoff, and so apparently we don't have that yet.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Ottman, the Forms Committee is working on it, and they have to, again, it is a digital platform. Our forms are digital. And so they have inserted it, and it is at the attorney's office getting approved. All of our forms have to be approved by attorneys because we don't have licenses to practice law. So it's in the works, but I don't have one physically with me.
Okay, well, that's a little bit different than a follow-up, please.
Representative Ottman.
Okay, and also, being a trade organization and a lobbyist, that doesn't put you boots on the ground to what the realtors and salespeople actually say. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, I still have my real estate license, my broker's license. I have an active brokerage license, and I am in touch with people that list and sell real estate across the state every day.
Follow-up, please.
Representative Ottman.
Okay. When sales are being made, okay, and I know there's a lot of people moving here, and that's why I support this, is because of the reality that lots of people are moving here and don't always know what's in the perimeter of the land. They have a piece of property that's for sale, could be a multi-listing that they're not familiar with, and they may not know all the particulars of a piece of property. Once that is sold and people move in and go through a year or a year and a half and realize the things that are in their area, that's when the problems occur. And I believe that this is trying to alleviate that problem, just to make people aware of actually what could be over that little hill or down the road just a ways. And so that's the attempt of this, I believe, is just to alleviate problems, not to overstep or say that someone's not doing their job. So does that make sense?
Mr. Chairman, I certainly agree that we need to have this discussion. I don't see it's a place in the state of Wyoming to mandate a specific disclosure and the wording in said disclosure to be quite as lengthy as it is. There was testimony that the longer the disclosure, the least likely people are going to read it. When you're doing a real estate transaction, the stack of papers can be like that already. Adding another one and hoping someone reads it and hoping they understand it is probably less effective than having that conversation when you're writing the contract, when you're sitting with the buyers and sellers and writing the contract, have that conversation then. Adding another piece of paper, I don't think is the solution.
Additional questions for Ms. Urbacate? All right, thank you, Ms. Urbacate.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Additional public testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jim McGagnon with the Wyoming Stock Growers Association, and also speaking on behalf of the Wyoming Wool Growers Association. And had we been talking about this 25 years ago, I would be sitting here telling you I don't think we need this in Wyoming. Things have changed. People are buying property up. We're seeing far more subdivisions and breaking up of property in the state. And certainly this isn't going to keep a purchaser from filing a lawsuit if they feel their rights have been infringed upon. But where we see it can be helpful is it can keep some of those people who might be potential plaintiffs from buying the property in the first place. And that's the value we see in something like this. Appreciate the position of the retail, of the realtors, and as I understand it, they're not disagreeing that this is important information. So our position would be, at first we didn't request this legislation. We didn't start out with it. But as we've made our members aware that this bill exists, I've been getting some pretty strong feedback saying we think this is a good thing. We think this would avoid some conflicts in the future and encouraging us to support the legislation. And on that basis, Mr. Chairman, I see no harm done by this, and we would support the bill as it's presented to you today. Be happy to entertain any questions.
Questions for Mr. McGagnon? All right, thank you, Mr. McGagnon.
Thank you.
Additional public testimony? None in the room. We have any virtual testimony? No virtual testimony. I will close public testimony. Committee, what is your pleasure? It's moved by Representative Ottman. Seconded by, sorry, who was that? Representative Haraldson. Okay. Do we have any amendments to page 1? Go ahead and work the bill. Amendments to page 2. Amendments to page 3. Amendments on page 4. No amendments? Any discussion on this bill? Representative Wiley?
Mr. Chairman, I fully appreciate the intent brought by the bringer of this bill, but I think we're too narrowly defined for something that's going to affect statute that we're going to put in the Green Book. And I would say that we need to broaden it out and put some inclusions in there for industry and some other things for more broadened protection. And because of that, I think probably should put this back out for some more work before we put it to the floor.
Okay, additional testimony?
Mr. Chair.
Representative Ottman and then Representative Haroldson.
Yes, and I can look that up. The statute that's in the Green Books right now, this section goes in there into section B and fits right with it. It's under that specific heading, and it's not broad. It is for specifically the farms and ranches. And so it fits right in there perfectly. If you'd like, I'll read it to you.
Okay. Representative Haroldson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So that statute, that 11-44-104 is the right to farm statute. So if we put more than just that in there, it'd be the right to farm and refine oil or something like that. And we couldn't really do that. And so the 50 state right to farm concept, this is just going in there and saying, hey, we have the right to farm. This is already a protection for our farmers. This just adds in the ability for there to be that knowledge going forward. I live in a country where we do have hog farms and we do have feedlots and we do have people coming in, and the first time that west wind kicks up pretty solid and they go, wait a second, what's that smell? Well, that's the feedlot. Well, I didn't know there was a feedlot. So I think this would be, if anything, I see this more as I think almost working in the other direction of helping people understand you're in a little community of Wyoming and we got cattle and we got sheep and we got pigs and we got chickens and we got all those things and we got farming and some spraying. And so I think this would be a good opportunity to just make sure those that want to live in our state have an understanding of what they're moving into. So would ask for a favorable consideration. And I think we can't go any broader if we're going to stay in that 11-44-103. Thank you.
Representative Knapp.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Ultimately, I would like to see, like Representative Wiley said, a more broad aspect of statute with buyer acknowledgement and disclosure. But for this case, I'm going to vote yes to at least get it to the floor and let the debate continue.
All right, let's do a roll call vote on Senate File 134, right to farm real estate disclosures.
Representative Chadwick. Representative Haroldson.
Aye.
Representative Harshman. Vice Chairman Knapp.
Aye.
Representative Newsom. Representative Ottman. Representative Wiley. Representative Yin. Chairman Olson.
No.
6 no, 3 aye. Motion that fails.
Okay, thank you, Barb. We are adjourned.